The title of this presentation is The Untold Story of the Bhagavad Gita. Its purpose is to reveal the true intent and spirit of the Bhagavad Gita in its historical context. My name is Dr. Kamath, and you can access more information on my book on the website untoldstorybhagavadgita.com. Now, every Hindu is familiar with this picture. It hangs on the walls of just about every Hindu I know, all over India and also abroad. Unfortunately, this is also the story of how Western interest destroyed the essence of the Bhagavad Gita. This presentation has 6 parts. And the very first part is dedicated to knowing the importance of the historical context of the Bhagavad Gita. Hindus revere Bhagavad Gita as one of 3 sacred books of Hinduism: the Vedas, the Upanishads, and the Bhagavad Gita. The reason Bhagavad Gita has such high esteem in the minds of Hindus is because it contains the essence of the Vedic, the Upanishadic, and the Bhagavata doctrines. For 2000 years or more, Bhagavad Gita has been the handbook of Hinduism. The main thing to remember is that faith in the sacred texts, such as this one, often determines the fate of nations and the course of history. When we interpret any sacred document, whether it is ancient or modern, whether it is secular or religious, whether it is personal or impersonal, the most important single thing is to know the exact context of every word, every phrase, and every shloka or verse in it. When someone interprets one of these 3 things literally or in the wrong context, the result could be disastrous. I'll give a simple example. Ignorant of the historical context of the word jihad in Quran, ignorant Islamic extremists have been indulging in mindless terrorism against people whom they consider as infidels. The real meaning of the word jihad is struggle. It was in the context of the origins of Islam. It meant the struggle to establish a new religion in Arabia. The Bhagavad Gita has 2 contexts: the well-known context, the Mahabharata context, and everyone thinks that the Bhagavad Gita's only context is Mahabharata context. And there is another context to the Bhagavad Gita, and that is unknown to most people. It is historical context. Now, most of the slokas in the Bhagavad Gita have only historical context. They have no Mahabharata context. In other words, they cannot be applied to Arjuna's mental conflict on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. However, over 1,200 years, every single commentator has misinterpreted these slokas in the Mahabharata context. As you will see pretty soon, the result has been disastrous to India. The question is, what is the historical context? Now, this addresses 2 issues. One is, what were the historical processes and events that led to the creation of the 77 sloka long original Gita, also known as Arjuna Vishada Gita? And secondly, how did this brief poem dealing with manifesto of Varna Dharma end up as a 701 sloka long theistic philosophical masterpiece known as the Bhagavad Gita Upanishad? I need to go over briefly what happened in India between 1500 BC, because that has a lot to do with the creation of the Bhagavad Gita. The upper classes of Brahmanism, known as Brahmins and Kshatriyas, they converted yajnas, which were originally meant to clear the debt people owed to the gods for rains and other natural bounties, into selfish yajnas known as kamya karma, desire-driven karma. Now, the purpose of these corrupt yajnas was to gain as much karma phalam. Karma phalam means fruits of deeds for kshatriya sponsors. And these yajnas became increasingly ostentatious and vulgar only because they gained the yajna performing Brahmins a lot of fee, dana, because part of yajna is dana. After yajna, after performing fire sacrifices, the kings had to give dana, that is gift, to Brahmins. The process went on getting worse until animal sacrifices began, because by sacrificing something very dear to the performers of yajna, they earn more karma phalam. Karma phalam is fruits of deeds. What is meant by karma phalam? You see, according to the law of karma, any action gained a person fruits of deeds, karma phalam, which he could enjoy in his next life. A second process began to take place. The upper classes who performed yajna, rituals, began to look down upon the lower classes, such as Vaishyas and Shudras, who did not perform yajna. They said that these two classes were born in the evil wombs, and they began to look down upon these people in a very terrible fashion. And they also forbade admixture of classes. They said that upper class women should not marry the lower class men. And such a union was described as Varna Sankara. In other words, it's a class admixture. And children born out of such unions were condemned as outcasts. Later on, a large section of these people became untouchables. So the society divided itself into the upper classes and lower classes, and this polarization created tremendous amount of tension in India. Now, a large number of people in India began to look at Brahmanism as a decadent dharma. They thought that this dharma, which had come into being to bring law and order in India, had itself become a dharma, that is irreligion. So several Gnostic dharmas arose in India, such as Buddhism, Jainism, Ajivika, Lokayat, and many others, in reaction to the decadence of Brahmanism. And a lot of people began to abandon Brahmanism to join these dharmas, which are known as heterodox dharmas. Heterodox dharmas are in contrast to orthodox Vedic dharma. Gnostic means those who did not believe in Vedic dharma. That is all it meant. It didn't mean that they did not believe in gods or anything. But it so happens that they were agnostic dharmas. They did not know whether there was God or not. So the turmoil continued in India between the years of 1000 and 500 BC. Within the fold of Brahmanism itself, there arose some revolt. Some Kshatriya intellectuals who were disgusted by what was happening to their dharma decided to overthrow Brahmanism. They came up with the two secret doctrines, which they called rahasyam, secret. And their texts were known as the Upanishads. Now, they created this super god called Brahman and said that part of him resided in the hearts of all people, and therefore all people are equal. And they came up with a technique called yoga of renunciation. They said that if one renounces the sense objects, money, power, position, title, and all that, their mind becomes steady and they can get to know this god Brahman, who resides in one's own heart as Atman. And they said that if one performed karma, any action without desire for fruits, karma phalam, then they would not earn any karma phalam and they will not be born again and again in this miserable world. So their doctrines replace Brahmanism's super god, Prakriti, and they dismantle the very foundation of Brahmanism, gunas of Prakriti and the law of karma, which we will discuss later what they are. And they said that Vedas were avidya. Avidya means ignorance. And yajnas were useless. And Varna Dharma was patently unjust. And Brahmins were not superior to anybody else because the same Brahman resided in the hearts of all people. Now this was a revolutionary idea for those days. I'm talking about 900 to 500 BC. It was just fantastic idea. Now, the Upanishadic doctrine of Brahman and Yoga posed mortal threat to Brahmanism because Yoga meant that the Brahmins had to give up performing very profitable yajna and that would strike a blow to their lavish lifestyle. Now, they did not know what to do in the beginning. Then they said, here is what we can do. They added to these Upanishads pro-yajna, pro-veda, pro-varna dharma and pro-Brahmin stuff and declared them as Shruti. Shruti means that which was heard. And that means that it can be orally transmitted if a Brahmin chose to utter it. And the lower classes were not allowed to listen to it. And they added so much stuff into it that the original Upanishadic doctrines were lost in the voluminous amount of Brahmanic stuff. And ultimately what they did was they attached these basically anti-Brahmanic documents, now completely corrupted and Brahmanized. They attached them to the lower end of the ritual-oriented Vedas and called them the Vedanta, the end part of the Vedic wisdom. That's what it said. We need to know the role Ashoka the Great played in the creation of the Bhagavad Gita. In 261 BC, Ashoka waged a great war against Kalingas to his south and east. After he watched on the battlefield the carnage, he was grief-stricken. He began to have doubts about his own Kshatriya dharma. The violence nature of it made him feel very dejected. Gradually, he abandoned Brahmanism and embraced Buddhism. He encouraged a lot of people to join him as Buddhists, and a large number of Kshatriyas began to abandon Brahmanism to join Buddhism as bhikkhus. In fact, thousands upon thousands of them left their families and children to join Buddhism. So Brahmanism lost the patronage of royal houses in India, which they had enjoyed for many centuries before that. So it practically went on deathbed. In 252 BC, Ashoka hosted the third great Buddhist council near Pataliputra. And this event practically spelled death knell for Brahmanism. This was the most critical moment for Brahmanism during its 1,750 years or more. And so something had to be done. But Ashoka had forbidden any open criticism of other dharmas, and so Brahmanism had no choice but to attack Ashoka and Buddhism by means of a brief poem called Arjuna Vishada. And this they added as flashback into the Mahabharata. Now, the apparent goal of this poem was to promote Varna Dharma in a very innocent way. But the secret goal was to condemn Ashoka and his Buddhist followers. And so the Arjuna Vishada, which is 77 shloka long, has numerous codes which I have cracked and explained in my book. And if you follow these codes, you will realize that the secret message is that people should not follow Ashoka, but they should follow Arjuna. So they model Arjuna after Ashoka, whereas Ashoka was grief-stricken after the war, Arjuna was grief-stricken before the war. When Upanishads found out that Brahmanic scribes had created Arjuna Vishada to promote Varna Dharma, they decided that that was a wonderful chance for them to now put forward their own rahasyam, doctrines, into this document to overthrow Brahmanism again. Now this time around, Brahmanism could not declare it as Shruti, off limits to people, because it is already a part of Smriti, which is Mahabharata. So a Smriti, cannot be reclassified as Shruti. Now, Upanishads decided to use Arjuna's grief as an excuse to introduce their doctrines of Brahman, Atman, and Yoga into the Bhagavad Gita. Upanishads added their shlokas in several stages. In the first stage, they elevated Prince Krishna, Achyuta as they called him, in the Arjuna Vishada Gita. They elevated him to the position of Upanishadic Guru in 2.7, and they began to condemn the ritualists and the Vedas and yajnas severely in shlokas of the Bhagavad Gita. Now, when they found out that there was a tremendous amount of backlash from Brahmanic scribes, they decided to protect their shlokas by elevating Guru Krishna to the position of Lord of Beings. Krishna declares himself as the Lord of Beings in 4.6, and he declares Brahmanism as decadent in 4.7, and he declares the ritualists as evildoers in 4.8. That is where the context of the shloka, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata abhyuttanam adharmasyam tadatmanam srajam mayam, comes there. That is where the Upanishads declare the Brahmanism as decadent, and they want to establish a new dharma called Upanishadism. And they try to convert Brahmin ritualists into Jnana yogis and Kshatriya ritualists into Karma yogis. However, like before, Brahmanic scribes came to know that this was a ruse by Upanishads to overthrow Brahmanism, and so they added pro-yajna, pro-varna dharma, pro-veda shlokas into this text, using Lord Krishna himself as their spokesperson. As a result, that text became totally incoherent and self-contradictory. At this point, a sect by the name of Bhagavata sect from northwest India, they came to the rescue of Upanishads. They combined Upanishadic principles of yoga with their principle of bhakti and converted the whole system into bhakti yoga. And this bhakti yoga was to worship Krishna, whose name was combined with Vasudeva of Bhagavatas, and so the new god was created, Lord Krishna, the Parameshwara, the Supreme Lord. And they said that Lord Krishna resided in the heart of all people, just like Brahman did. In other words, Lord Krishna replaced Brahman as the Supreme Lord. And they said that anyone who surrendered to Lord Krishna was equal. In other words, there was no class system. So the new dharma called the Bhagavata dharma came into being. Now this dharma was all-inclusive dharma, and it included into the Bhagavad Gita the most important tenets of Jainism and Buddhism. Now Lord Krishna offered this dharma to people of India, every dharma of India, and said, abandon all dharma and surrender unto me alone, and I shall liberate you from all evil. Do not grieve. In 1866. Once again, the Upanishadic and Bhagavata shlokas in the Bhagavad Gita pose mortal threat to Brahmanism, because in 1148 and 53 shlokas, Lord Krishna condemns the Vedas and all the things that go with the Vedas as useless in attaining the knowledge of the God. So the Brahmanism did not know what to do. However, loyalists came up with one simple thing that worked for them when they destroyed the Upanishadism. So what they did was they hyper-edited the text. They mixed shlokas of three dharmas, Upanishadism, Bhagavatism, and Brahmanism, thoroughly mixed them and added some ambiguous shlokas as uttered by Lord Krishna, and transposed some shlokas here and there. In fact, they even altered one shloka, 920, and presented this combined document as the Bhagavad Gita Upanishad. They claimed the Brahmanic doctrines as part of this Bhagavad Gita Upanishadism. And now this text became almost totally incoherent and self-contradictory. So the shlokas that represent Upanishadism and Bhagavatism condemn Brahmanism, and Brahmanic shlokas condemn Upanishadism and some of the Bhagavata doctrines. So that is why the Bhagavad Gita is so hard to interpret right now. Like a child grabbing the legs of a harsh parent to escape punishment, Brahmanism clung to the Bhagavad Gita as its handbook, and as Hinduism evolved over the centuries, it became the handbook of Hinduism. But they were all interpreted. The Bhagavad Gita was interpreted by Brahmins, and they had no desire to expose the truth that most of the Upanishadic and Bhagavata shlokas in the Bhagavad Gita were designed to overthrow Brahmanism. The prestige of Bhagavad Gita kept on increasing because it was completely under the domination of Brahmins, and they began to use Bhagavad Gita to promote corrupt yajnas and perverted varna dharma, and the class system and jati system, that is caste system, took firm roots in India. Hindu kings relied heavily on the interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita by Brahmanic scribes. And the first among the commentators was Shankaracharya in 788 and 820 AD. So in the first part of 9th century, Shankaracharya wrote his Bhashya, that is commentary of the Bhagavad Gita, without knowing the context, the real context of the Bhagavad Gita Upanishad. Apparently, Shankaracharya did not know that the Upanishadic and Bhagavata shlokas were designed to overthrow Brahmanism. If he knew, and there is some evidence in his commentary that he knew, he did not show it. So he interpreted all these shlokas as applicable to Arjuna, the battlefield of Kurukshetra, and by extension to Kshatriyas on the battlefield. And because he was held in extremely high regard by Hindus, his word became sacrosanct. So Shankaracharya started in his Bhashya misinterpreting shlokas condemning yajna and karmaphalam as applicable to Arjuna. I will give you just three examples of misinterpretation and the disastrous consequences to India thereof. In Shloka 924, as part of Bhagavata revolution to overthrow Brahmanism, Lord Krishna replaces Vedic gods as the Lord of Yajna. He says, I am the Lord of Yajna now. And he says in 926 that instead of burning animals, food and ghee and other stuff in the fire, they should offer him with bhakti and without any desire for stuff, just a leaf, a flower or water. And then he said in 927 that if they perform any sacrifices, the dana, that is gift that they give to Brahmins, they should dedicate it to him. The spirit of these shlokas is that he really wanted to end yajna, and instead people should focus on bhakti, just pure bhakti, with simple bhakti without any ostentatious yajnas. Shankaracharya interpreted these shlokas literally, and he said that, here is what he said: this being the case, whatever you do spontaneously, whatever you eat, offer a sacrifice according to the Vedas and Smriti, whatever you give to holy men, etc., gold, food, lustrated butter, whatever penance you perform, O Arjuna, do all these as offering to me. Based on this literal interpretation, loyalists began to build grand temples all over India. They reinstated yajna in a disguised form. It's called puja. That's fire worship of the idols. And they told the devotees to donate gold, silver and jewelry to these idols in the temples. Believing that the Lord would expiate their sins and fulfill their desires, these naive people began to donate wealth to these idols in the temple, just like people are doing to this day in India. You have heard of things like people donating enormous amount of wealth to Tirupati temple and this temple and that temple. Now, within a few years, temples across India began to bloat with wealth. There was enormous amount of wealth that accumulated in these temples. Let me discuss the interpretation of Shloka 247 by Shankaracharya. In that Shloka, Lord Krishna lays down the law to corrupt ritualists. He says, your entitlement or your right is only to perform yajna according to the ordinances of scriptures and never to its fruits. Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. Ma karma pala hetur burmate sangotva karmani. And never to its fruits. But so do not be the cause of karma palam, fruits of yajna. Okay. His goal was to eliminate corrupt yajnas that earn karma palam for kshatriyas and huge gifts to Brahmins. That was the real intent of the sloka. Shankaracharya misinterpreted this shloka and applied it to Arjuna. He said, quote, while doing works, do not think you have the right to claim their fruits. Never in any state of life whatsoever should you crave for the fruits of your works. This is the idea. Now, when applied to Arjuna or other Kshatriyas, the bottom line is Kshatriyas have no right to gain from their fighting. In other words, they have no right to the fruits of their fighting. Now, this interpretation went squarely against the code of the warrior which Prince Krishna gave to Arjuna as part of Arjuna Vishada, which is absolutely a fantastic advice. He said to Arjuna, looking at your own duty, you should not waver, for there is nothing more welcome to a Kshatriya than righteous war. Happy are the Kshatriyas who obtain such warfare that comes unsought as open gateway to heaven. Slain, you will attain heaven. Victorious, you will enjoy the earth. Therefore, stand up, resolved to fight. Now, let us take up the next sloka, 1866. In this sloka, Lord Krishna tells aggrieved people who are disgusted by decay of Brahmanism, abandon all dharma and surrender unto me alone. I shall deliver you from all evil. Do not grieve. Now, Lord Krishna's goals were two: establish an inclusive dharma centered on him alone to replace all quarreling dharmas of India. and deliver aggrieved people from the evils of the doctrines of gunas of Prakriti and the law of karma. Because you see, it is the gunas of Prakriti, the doctrine of gunas of Prakriti, that was the reason why Varna Dharma was perverted. And it is the law of karma was why the yajnas were corrupted. And so the purpose of the Bhagavata revolution was to give people a tool to overcome these two doctrines. Now Shankaracharya, apparently not knowing the context of this shloka, said as follows: giving up all dharmas, acts of righteousness, seek refuge in me alone. I shall liberate you from all sins. Grieve not. All dharma or acts of righteousness, dharma, righteousness here includes adharma, unrighteousness also. What is sought to be conveyed is the idea of freedom from all works. Dharma here means karma. In other words, Shankaracharya wanted people to give up all action, all karma. The bottom line was that give up all fighting, righteous as well as unrighteous fighting. The interpretation of these three shlokas alone, leave alone the other shlokas, created some doubts in the minds of Kshatriyas about their duty and about the code of the warrior. You know, Shankaracharya's interpretation were faithfully transmitted to the kings by spiritual advisors of the kings in a parrot-like fashion. In other words, they did not have independent thinking. They simply said, Shankaracharya said this to be the case, and so all kings believed them. So a seed of doubt was placed in the minds of very capable kings of India regarding the warfare, the purpose of the warfare, and regarding the karmapalam of warfare. The consequences of such misinterpretation was very serious. Between 11th century and 13th century, sultans of Afghanistan raided the temples that were bloated with enormous amount of wealth. Such a wealth the world has never seen before, anywhere in any country in the world. Year after year they came and looted the treasures, they broke the idols, destroyed the temples. They defeated and killed very capable kings who fought without spirit of fighting. If you analyze their fighting, you will find that they were not fighting according to the code of the warrior. Some of them even ran away from the battlefield. The Rajputs were never known to do that before the 11th century. Never did they run away from the battlefield. But one after another king fell on the battlefield. Now the foundation for 700 years of foreign rule was laid. Mughals followed Afghans, British followed Mughals. They looted India mercilessly and impoverished it. Hindus became their slaves for 700 years. Now when the British left, corrupt Hindu leaders took over India and they began to loot it. In 65 years following independence, they looted more wealth from Indians than all the wealth looted by the invaders for 700 years before. Such is the state of affairs of modern India now. Unable to deal with the Islamic onslaught, Hindus withdrew into their shell. They didn't know what to do. Every new ignorant commentator of the Gita kept misinterpreting the Gita. And progressively Hinduism became the mirror image of decadent Brahmanism. Thus the foundation for all great melodies of modern India was laid over 700 years. So here is what Hinduism today. It is nothing but decadent Brahmanism in disguise. Scores of gods, hundreds of mindless, ostentatious rituals, thousands of senseless superstitions, corrupt swamis, gurus and priests and pandas manipulating, fleecing and abusing deluded people with impunity, millions of zombie-like devotees on pilgrimage to corrupt temples and filthy holy places, ostentatious temples covered with silver and gold, thousands of castes and subcastes, disgraceful practice of untouchability, honor killing of young people, abuse of Dalits, right-wing Hindu thugs attacking people of other faiths and dissenters, simply because they don't have any argument. They are intellectually bankrupt. People of other faiths and dissenters are attacked all the time. Caste-based politics, systemic corruption in all institutions, whether they are political, bureaucratic, financial, business, and armed forces. India today is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. Now, all of these people will claim to be Pakka Hindus. They have big namas over their foreheads, and they go to temples and they do this and they do that, they do yajna, puja, and everything else. But once they leave the temple, they are corrupt to the core. Now, this is the shame of Hindus. Every single malady of modern India could be traced to this single fact: destruction of the true intent and spirit of the Bhagavad Gita Upanishad by the vested interests solely for the purpose of protecting their livelihood. Now, this is truly the tragedy of India. In the following parts, we will discuss in greater detail some of these things that we discussed before. How did Sanatana Dharma evolve? Why did it decay? Who were Upanishadis who wanted to overthrow Brahmanism? How did Ashoka the Great unwittingly help Brahmanism? Why did Brahmanic loyalists create Arjuna Vishada Gita? Why did Upanishadis add their slokas into Arjuna Vishada? How did Brahmanic loyalists react? Why did Bhagavatas enter the fray? And things like that. And I recommend the audience to go over each slide carefully, and there will not be any commentary from me. Thank you and have a good day.